Sí, vídeo que yo puedo guardar para que
¿Pero nos va a ver la gente?
No. No, es
Audio.
I'll put my video.
Hola,
Ay, Julia.
¿cómo te creció el pelo?
¡Ay, Elba! ¿Cómo estás? Vístete con pelo largo.
Estás hermosa.
Otra vez.
Esta es mi nuera. Oye, ¿qué pasó?
Hola.
Hola, ¿qué tal?
¿Qué tal?
I can't make it mirror. You know what I want to do? You have Zoom on your
Ahora.
phone.
Lo tienes que poner en la oreja. Ok, chao, hasta luego.
God damn it.
You can see the chat here. Let me see. I'll put the chat option. Ahora cuando termine esto.
Where is it?
Empezamos. Bien.
Here, I'm going to send this to your phone, okay?
No, o sea, en la reunión que hice.
I'm sending it to Leon, okay?
Ouch.
Are we making kale tonight? Then I don't, or we want Mexican. All right, then I don't need your phone.
Denis no está, aunque dijo que iba a estar.
Sorry.
Okay. We wanted to welcome you all with a little bit of music. It's part of the music that we will listen to today as we learn about the origin and the roots, the elements that made tango what it is today. We are the Reno Tango Collective. I'm Elena. And I'm Julia. And today we will talk a little bit about and to have that conversation, we will have to visit the Buenos Aires of the 19th century, end of 19th century. That's when tango started to take shape. So
a little bit of we're not a large group. You're more than welcome to mute yourself out. So if you think that there will be some background noise, maybe if you have a dog, a cat, a child, or just, I don't know, you live close to the street and you kind of think that there's going to be a background noise, you can mute yourself out. But also because we're a small group, you know, and we wanted this to be interactive, you can just stay the way you are.
We want this presentation to be more like a conversation where people can ask questions, comment as we progress into the presentation. And also, if you want to keep your questions for the end, we will have a 20-minute time in the end of the presentation for you to make questions or comments, and so that we can all talk a little bit and visit and talk about what we saw, what we thought, what triggered on us, because, you know, tango is a very rich subject matter that always touches social aspects, musical aspects, historic aspects, and there's always very interesting thoughts and ideas that you can all bring to the conversation when we come to the end. and we can have fun and talk a little bit and pretend like we are in a milonga again.
But of course, if you have a question that's, you know, coming to your mind and you want to ask the question, you can interrupt, you know, the presentation or conversation, or you can just type your question into the chat box. So we have another computer here, and one of us is gonna kind of monitor the chat. And if there's any question that you want to ask, we'll just kind of read it and answer it as we go. So whatever you prefer, whatever works for you, works for us as well.
So today we will talk a little bit about the very first origins of tango, the very beginnings, the roots, the influences that made tango rise and made tango be born in Buenos Aires at that early time in the 1880s of Buenos Aires. So we will go through the first, what historians consider the first period of tango from a musical perspective. It's called Guardia Vieja. So it's the very first period of tango. If we wanted to see, like, go through all the history of tango, we would need years. So we decided to start with the very first part, when tango was born in Buenos Aires of the late 19th century. And for this, we will talk a little bit about politics, society, culture, immigration, musical influences, and the whole historic context of tango at the very beginnings.
So before we start, I don't know, we don't want to assume that everyone knows everything about tango. So maybe if you can type in the chat, do you know anything about tango? You don't know anything. So you can say yes, no, maybe. So if we can, you can just type how familiar you are with tango, so we can kind of know how.
Or what do you know about tango, about the history of tango? Some people, there's tango from all parts of the world, and some people, rightfully so, speak about Finnish tango or French tango, and of course me, because I'm from Buenos Aires, I laugh about those people, but that's just my own defect from being from Buenos Aires and laughing about other tango origins, other tango styles. So, because in the end, this is a music and a dance that started in Buenos Aires, but it went to all the world, and it has its own story in each country, in each culture.
So from what we read in the chat, some of you know a bit, some of you know some minimal historic facts. Some people say I know some, but not everything. I have heard stories about sailors and shore leave. So we all know something, and maybe there's something we don't know. So before we start and we go into the presentation about tango, we wanted you to kind of enjoy a short poem from an Argentine poet that was kind of fascinated by tango. And while you're listening to the poem, which has English translation, so it's going to be in Spanish, but with English translation, if you can just kind of type in the chat, what are the emotion that this poem brings to you? So maybe it's sadness or happiness, whatever you feel while you're enjoying this poem, please, if you can type it in the chat. So now, if you can mute yourself out for a second, we're going to go to our poem. It's just a few minutes, and we're going to enjoy and kind of feel.
This is like an icebreaker. It's a contemporary poet from Buenos Aires. His name is Horacio Ferrer. And he was asked, what is tango? One time by someone, I don't know if someone from Buenos Aires or someone from a different place asked him, what is tango? And from that question, he came up with this poem about what is tango according to him. So now listen to his poem. It's himself reciting the poem in Buenos Aires in the Rio de la Plata, a river. And then we will talk about that poem. Sure. Present. Next slide.
Tango es algo que la noche va silbando y no está en ningún repertorio. Me preguntás, amor mío, pequeña mía, ¿qué es el tango? Y yo, duende del asfalto, te digo. Creo que tango es eso que provoca un clavel en mi solapa cuando no tengo ni para claveles y voy a verte. En lo alto de las estaciones de tren, una paloma se muere del todo, por ese que solo se muere un poco, esperando a quien no llegó. Y es tanguista el gato calavera que se burla de la solterona, pero que no la abandona jamás. Y es tango el timbre que suena y suena en una casa vacía, y también hay tango en los ojos del que llamó y se va con su ausencia puesta. Y esos alegrones sin motivo, viste, pececitos de oro en las profundidades de la vida son tango, y es tango una cara que no refleja los espejos de los cafés, y es tangueado el son de la lluvia en la ventana, cuando la ventana queda solo sostenida por nuestras miradas. Tango es algo que la noche va silbando y no está en ningún repertorio. Y es tango la danza que era el último suspiro con la postrer galantería, y creo que es tango cualquier síntoma de canción de cuna en el día final.
So if you can type one word, one emotion that you felt maybe by listening to this poetry, what would that be? Would it be sadness or happiness? Or maybe nothing, I don't know.
What did the poem made you think about or feel?
You can say it, you can type it, whatever you prefer, whatever is easier for you. Eclectic longing and connection. Romanticism, definitely. I don't know if anyone else is typing, but probably it will be a different emotion for every person, right? And that's kind of what we feel or find in tango, a combination of different emotions, and maybe each person lives or feels tango in a different way. So I think we should go back in time. We should go back to the 18th century, right?
Yes, because the idea of this video was also to confront ourselves with our preconceived ideas about tango. And of course, there's an idea and an image of tango that is created in every country. There's an American idea of tango, there's a French concept of tango, and there's an Argentine feeling of tango that I think is very much conveyed in this poem. So the idea is that we break our own prejudices and beyond what tango means to each one of us, we, I think, can all agree it triggers strong feelings. And for that, and to understand a little bit of that and the elements that make tango trigger those strong feelings, the idea is to go a little bit back in time and understand what was going on in Buenos Aires when tango was created and started becoming popular afterwards, to understand a little bit more of those elements that make tango what it is today. So for that, we're going to look back in history as if we were anthropologists, archaeologists, and see what was Buenos Aires like. What was Buenos Aires like at that time? Here is a map of Buenos Aires in 1713. So you can see this is just a very small colony that belongs to Spain, of course, and it is tiny and it is very simple, and it consists basically of the typical Spanish town, where you can see these perfectly divided squares around this big plaza that's in the center. And around this plaza, which is Plaza de Mayo, you can see there's this is the city hall, this is the main bank. Later on, the opera house was built here, and the post office, and here now is also the most important cathedral of Buenos Aires. So it was the typical small Spanish town built around the plaza from colonial times. And this is Rio de la Plata here. Very beautiful map. Here we're already in the 1870. So Argentina becomes independent in 1810. And we can see here already the growth of the city. This is Plaza de Mayo, the same place we saw before, but the squares have grown all the ways outwards. This is the south. You can see La Boca here, which is one of the birthplaces of tango. Here is San Telmo, also by the river, Barracas. And here is the northern area of the city. Here is Palermo, Palermo is the outskirts, which nowadays it's like the center of the city, but at that time it was more or less like the countryside. So
this is like a contrast between what Buenos Aires was in the 16th century versus 1936,
yes.
Which was a little bit later, and you can see the city has grown a lot. So the kind of the 1800s, mid 1800s, late 1800s was all about Argentina growing, right? And they were very turbulent times, because at some point they decided that they want independence. They didn't want it to be the Spanish colony. They kind of had a different type of identity, because many of the, as we call them, the fathers of the Argentine nation were already born on Argentine soil. So they didn't really share that connection with Spain as, you know, the generations before that had more of those tight connections. So the 19th century, you know, was all about that struggle for independence, struggle for identity, struggle for cutting those ties with Spain. And so at that time, we have two political parties, one of them looking more towards Buenos Aires as the center of the culture, of the economic progress, politics, and another political party that was looking more outside of Buenos Aires. So they were more focused on the province. At the same time, Argentina, not only Argentina, what we today know as Argentina, but all Latin America becomes very interesting place to visit for many of the European travelers and also travelers for Northern America. So if we look at the 19th century, we're going to see that there are a lot of books written about Argentina, And we can think that it was kind of the curiosity of the tourists, but all those countries like France and Great Britain and America, Northern America, they had interest in Argentina because of the potential when it comes to resources. So Argentina was very rich in meat or beef, right? Even today. And then they became the biggest exporter of wheat, wool, and what else? And meat, wool, and meat, right? Can you move the slide forward? Also there was this idea that yes, the country is growing. We have this vast territories of the Argentine soil. Well, when you look at progress and the ideas that the fathers of the nation had for Argentina, they thought that it might be a good idea to bring more people. So they were looking towards Europe as a potential source of immigration, but their idea of immigration was kind of the educated European that's gonna, you know, contribute to that cultural and economic progress of Argentina. However, as we can kind of see in this picture that we're projecting right now, the reality was different. So the immigrants that arrived to Buenos Aires were very different than, you know, the imagined immigrant that the Argentine fathers were looking forward to.
So there was the late 19th century is the moment where Argentina is finding its own identity as a country and has this idea of progress and civilization. And those ideas of economic progress and civilization are always looking towards the European and especially the French model. In words of Alberdi, he says, to govern is to populate. And then Sarmiento with his idea of, he talks about civilization and barbarism. And for him, civilization is government, is a strong state, and is bringing immigrants from Europe because they are the intellectuals, they are the ones who know about politics, about progress, about work, about professions, and they want to bring all that knowledge and all that human resource into Argentina because Argentina has this big economic potential as the granary of the world, but they need people. You have to think that in 1869, there were only 170,000 people in all Argentina. So Argentina is this country that has this great potential, economy is growing very, very fast, but there's no people to employ or to work with. And because Sarmiento and Alberdi has these ideas that are looking towards Europe, they want to bring those people, not other immigrants, just those immigrants into the country to make them a workforce for the economy and also bring ideas, education, and progress and civilization into our population.
So in the beginning, we're going to notice, as we see in this picture, that it was predominantly a masculine immigration, and then it kind of makes sense. You know, it's not like today we take a plane and in 10 hours we're in Buenos Aires, 11 hours from San Francisco, or how many, 15 at the most. You know, they had to take a very long trips on a boat. So women and children stayed in their home countries and men took upon this journey. And the idea that immigrants had about America, they really didn't make any distinction between the North and the South. You know, the idea of coming to the Americas, you know, was to have a better life. In Spanish, we say something like hacer las Américas, which to translate in English would be to make the Americas, which means to succeed in the Americas. So that was their idea. They thought that they're coming to this country with this economic potential and that they're going to become rich in, I don't know, less than 1 year. However, they arrived to Buenos Aires and, you know, the reality they faced there, it's not exactly what they were expecting. You know, Buenos Aires is growing, but it doesn't really have the space to accommodate these immigrants. And the thing is that at that time we have really open policies on immigration. So, you know, there is no limits. And a lot of immigrants come to Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is in the process of growth, but however, they don't have any space to accommodate all
Argentina,
these
yeah,
people.
Argentina really doesn't have the infrastructure to host and to give proper living conditions and workplaces and organize all these new people that are coming. Think that in 1869, there were only 170,000 people in Argentina, and by 1914, there were 1.6 million people living in Buenos Aires. So in just a little bit over 100 years, 6 million immigrants from Europe had entered the port of Buenos Aires and had settled somewhere. Some of them went to the countryside, to the Pampas, but most people just stayed around the port area in Buenos Aires.
So there is a lot of tension. On one side, the immigrants are disappointed. You know, they're not making the Americas. They're not living that American dream, however you want to call it. On the other side, we have a disappointment on the side of the politicians because now they're not receiving the immigration that they were expecting. Again, Italian becomes the predominant language in the streets of Buenos Aires. The government is kind of not really nice to the immigrants. If you look at the literature of the end of the century, you're going to see the description of the typical Italian as someone that's, lower class, doesn't know how to speak properly, and eats a food that stinks. So from the point of view of the, of the upper classes, the Italian immigrants were the complete opposite of what they expected. So can you go to the next slide? So something similar, this is a picture from the immigration coming to New York. So the same process was happening towards Buenos Aires and New York. And a lot of times, as I said, immigrants did not distinguish between that New York, is in Northern America and Buenos Aires in South America. They were just going towards the Americas. And if you see on the ship, just coming from Eastern Europe, I'm Eastern European. These people, by the way they're dressed, they all come from rural areas.
In fact, there's a lot of friends of mine that tell me, oh yes, I have family in the US, because at the time that my grandparents came to Buenos Aires, his brother went to New York, or my grandmother's cousin went to New York, and they divided into different cities, different ends, different hemispheres, but with the same idea of hacerse la América.
And so even though the process of immigration was kind of similar between New York and Buenos Aires, the process of adaptation and assimilation to the society was very different. So in New York, people would kind of stick in their own groups. I don't know, if they came from Poland, they would, hang out with their Polish crowd. If they came from the Middle East, or unlike that, in Buenos Aires, we don't have those clusters, right? Everyone lives next to each other. Everyone kind of mixes around. So we don't have neighborhoods like Little Italy. So that's the idea of immigration was kind of the same, hacer las Américas. However, the process of adaptation, assimilation was very different.
Yeah, the different populations that land in Buenos Aires, mainly Spanish, Italian, French, German, Jewish, Polish, Russians, and Jews, of course, but they blend really well, and they land in a moment of Argentina where there's a very strong state, there's a very strong identity about being Argentinians. And somehow people in Buenos Aires, they don't mind being Italian and Porteño, Italian or Spanish and Argentine. There's really like both things can live together. This mixed identity doesn't create a problem or a conflict for people at all. In fact, immigrants, they do fund their own social clubs, hospitals and schools, but they are fine living next to each other, and they mix up pretty well. This is the car that takes the luggage, because in Buenos Aires, there's the port and there's a hotel of immigrants that today is a museum that you can go visit. It's beautiful, and it's the first place where immigrants were registered and they were given a national ID, and their luggage was taken there. Hopefully they found it. These are the immigrants in that hotel, the immigrant hotel, just playing some board game on the floor. Some of them reunited with family once they got to the port. Imagine at that time it was a 3-month trip on a boat and there was no communication at all. So this must have been a very emotional moment. These are some examples. This is a typical street of Buenos Aires in the 19th century. And you can see the Slavic bar and the people hanging out there in the sidewalks. This is the
Farmers market.
Yeah, it's like the market of Once. That is a very iconic neighborhood of Buenos Aires because the slaughterhouses brought their meat to that market, especially fresh. So it was where people used to go and buy their beef. And you can see the workers probably from all different nationalities, and you can see mostly men. And you can also see there's an embrace there that can tell us something about Buenos Aires and the mix of European immigrants. This is Plaza de Mayo, the same plaza we saw from above on the map, the central plaza, and you can see the horses and the carriages and the city already looking a little bit more tidy. But although there was this ambition for civilization and progress, there were also the orillas. That is something that is that appears a lot in Tango. That is the outskirts of the city. You can see there's what you see here in the back is Plaza de Mayo. And here is the outskirts. It's just dirt and water and kids playing and something drying in a bush. And some people claim that Tango started in these marginal outskirts of the city of Buenos Aires. So these are the places where the immigrants went to live. They were called conventillos. In English, they call it tenements. And these were places that were big old houses of wealthy families that then had been sold and subdivided in many, many, many different rooms. So usually houses that would have 25 people living now had 350 immigrants from different places living all together, maybe with a few bathrooms and one kitchen. These were the
Okay. ¿Qué persona está hablando?
No importa, sigamos.
¿Qué tal? It's like some picture of families of immigrants.
More conventillos, more tenements. There were, by 1907, there were 2,500 conventillos in Buenos Aires with 150,000 occupants. No falta tanto, después quedan pocos slides después de esto. So imagine these immigrants, they came and they were, they had left their homeland, they had left their workplaces, they had left, some of them, their families, their friends, of course, and they were all crowded together in these big old houses trying to figure out what to do in a rough Buenos Aires that's ever changing and transforming and trying to progress. These are the places where they used to eat. This is New Year's Eve in a tenement in 1904.
So as you've noticed in the pictures, we have predominantly masculine immigration. They're far away from their wives, from their families. in this new country, and they're trying to kind of, you know, negotiate their identity between being an Italian or European and being Argentine. And at the same time, we have, you know, brothels, and they become very popular in the capital of Argentina. And it's actually a very interesting place because men from lower, upper, middle class kind of got together in expectation for the same thing. However, you know, there were more men than women in these brothels. Most of the women were immigrants, so either French, Basque, you know, Polish, etc. And as we said, men were from mixed backgrounds, so either, you know, immigrants or they were middle upper class. Again, there were more men than women, so men had to wait in line until their turn comes. And this brothel came up with the idea of entertaining men while they were waiting for their turn. So what they did is that they brought some bands to play some music to entertain these men waiting for, you know, the available woman and waiting for their turn. So these bands played different kind of music. So there was a mix of music styles. There was some polka, there was some mazurka, what else? You said habanera.
Habanera, contradanza.
Contradanza, and men would entertain themselves by dancing one with the other. So when we talk about tango, we talk about as a dance that started between two men. So they were entertaining themselves while waiting for their turn to come. And as you can see in the picture,
there was this magical mix of, yes, different social classes, different nationalities, and everything they brought with that, their way of speaking, their vocabulary, their musical influences, their way of dancing, their attitudes, their style, their ideas, everything in those casitas that would translate to brothels, but it's different. In those casitas, all these things were shared in a very kind of like intimate and intense way. And there were all these amateur musicians that were trying to have fun and entertain the others. And so here we will talk about a little bit about the music. We will make a little parenthesis from the social context to the music they brought, these immigrants. What are the musical influences of tango? On one side, we have influences from Europe, and these are very important because Europeans, especially French and British, they bring their own popular musics, which are danced and played in a same ballroom in France and in Great Britain. So these are popular musics where there's a room, there's musicians playing, the musicians are watching the dancers, and there's this interaction between the people dancing and what the musicians are playing and what they play, so they see more dance, and this kind of like feedback and interaction between musicians and dancers, which we have until today in tango. So this is important. This is, for example, so we start connecting the influences and tango as we know it today. This is French country dance. So there you have popular music from France that people love to dance and that anyone can play and dance, and that people love to have fun with in these casitas of Buenos Aires. Then we have a big influence for tango, that is the Cuban contradanza. Imagine Cuba was conquered by the Spanish crown much earlier than Buenos Aires. So there's been this constant exchange between Spain and Cuba, back and forth, and music comes and goes with that. And so there's this Cuban contradanza that's a mix of Spanish music and rhythm with the Cuban element of the choreography, the dance, and the erotism of Cuban, Afro-Cuban dances. So that is the Cuban contradanza. And also from Cuba, we have the habanera. That is one of the main components of tango. Okay, so we have Cuban contradanza, habanera, and then there's also the influence from Spain directly, which is a genre that's very popular in Spain until today. That is teatro de zarzuela, and the zarzuela, it's like an operetta. It's like a Spanish version of the small opera, and it is showcased in Buenos Aires in the theaters. There's Teatro de Zarzuela. It becomes very popular. Imagine most people in Buenos Aires are from Spain. They all love to see their music and their characters and their scripts played on a stage of Buenos Aires. And the popular musicians of Buenos Aires start picking up on this zarzuela and start adopting and assimilating it and start making music with the music of the zarzuela.
Pobre chica, la que tiene que servir, más valiera que se llegase a morir, porque si es que no sabe por las mañanas brujulear, aunque 1000 años viva su paradero es el hospital.
So there you have the more dramatic aspect of tango that you can start understanding where does it come from, this Spanish kind of like bloody and
Spanish drama.
very deep feelings and very dramatic. Bueno, vamos a pasar a la próxima. There's another zarzuela there, but we'll move on because we're taking a little bit of time. And then there's also the influence of the criollo, the gaucho, because at this time there's already people from the countryside. They are Argentinians, they are gauchos. They have their guitars. Guitar is the music, the popular instrument by excellence. And they are called payadores, and they play the guitar and they improvise in their singing. And tango also takes a lot from the Argentine payadores.
Pobre mi madre querida, cuántos disgustos le daba. Pobre mi madre querida, cuántos disgustos le daba.
So this is not tango yet. This is just folkloric music of Argentina and the payadores singing. But you can tell there's a resonance of tango milonga with the guitar and that also strong, deep,
Emotion.
dramatic singing. Bueno, esto lo vamos a pasar. These are examples of the first popular groups of musicians of tango that are at that time, you know, the casitas and the immigrants. It's all very precarious and very rough. and there's no fanciness, there's no refinement, elegance, or glamour at all. So it's basically, tango starts as these genres start mixing up: habaneras, contradanzas, payadores, milongas. And basically the three instruments are guitar, flute, and violin, because these are the instruments that immigrants can carry in their ships and that they can have in a conventillo or anywhere, and it's fine. There was no piano, there was no bandoneon. Those are fancier, more expensive instruments that come into tango a little bit later. These are the casitas. The most famous ones were Lo de Laura and Lo de María la Vasca. Here you have some pictures. They were run by women that organized the whole situation. And according to Jorge Luis Borges, it's the very first place where tango is played and danced. Here you have another place that is important to the history of tango. That's Café de Hansen. It's in Palermo. Now it's been demolished. It's not there anymore, but you can see the dirt. This is the outskirts of Buenos Aires, the horses. And this is a cafe where tango was played before. At this time, you have to think that in Buenos Aires, tango was the music of the brothel, of the casitas, and it was an indecent and disrespectful dance. So tango was, for example, in this cafe, tango was played by musicians, but the dancing was prohibited because it was considered prostibular, it was considered indecent, it was considered something of the mala vida, the bad life, nightlife, and nobody wanted to see someone dance tango or even to have his or her daughter dancing tango.
Yeah, so like I think women at that time were kind of excluded from the scene, especially if you're a woman from a middle upper class. If you're a decent woman, you didn't want it to be seen, dancing tango, especially because dance is so particular, it's dance tango, we dance really close. So, there was all that idea of tango as a dangerous dance, which will later on, as we will see, change quite a bit. And women will be allowed, women from good houses or decent women were also allowed to kind of dance tango as well.
So tango existed in the brothels, in the casitas, but it was banned and forbidden from everywhere in Buenos Aires. And it was considered a rude and unworthy music and dance. These were the first formations. You can see the instruments, guitar and violin and flute over here. Here is a little bit later with the bandoneon. So we will talk a little bit about this time of the Guardia Vieja and the brothers and the archetypes. These are the characters of Buenos Aires of that time, of the late 19th century. This is what is called the compadrito. And he's like a gaucho, but that has emigrated to the city, and he's very skillful with his knife. Usually he works at a slaughterhouse or knows the trades of the countryside, and he is very street smart. He knows how to dance, he knows how to entertain.
And how to fight.
He's dangerous and people respect him. So when we looked for the definition of compadrito, for Argentina, we found person of the generation whose grandfathers fought in Argentina's War of Independence from Spain. That was the original definition of compadrito. And then we looked for the word on word reference, and it just said troublemaker. We thought that was very funny.
And they were.
Because they were troublemakers.
They were very charming. They knew how to dance, and so on, but they also knew how to fight. And many times they would look for trouble.
These were men that had a lot of style. They have a certain way of walking that was very particular. You could tell.
Confidence.
very confident, very graceful. They were dreaded and admired at the same time. Here is a compadrito with his knife in the outskirts, in the orillas of the city of Buenos Aires. So here we go. Okay, we go back to the first tango that appeared at this time. So that's the very first tango that was registered in France, because at that time there was no copyright authors or association for musicians in Buenos Aires. So they had to travel to France and register their song there. But it was the first one that was registered in the Argentine history, El Entrerriano, and it was composed for piano. And now you will understand why. Here we have El Choclo from Ángel Villoldo. This is considered the father of tango. And you can listen here to the original composition of El Choclo. Okay, so this is the first orquesta típica, Vicente Greco, and this is the first official orchestra of tango named as such. Like, this is tango, because before in the casitas we had habaneras, mazurcas, contradanza, and this weird mix that called milonga. But there's a moment where people around 1910, they start saying this is a tango, and this is what it sounded like.
And also, like, one of the important things is that depends where they were playing tango. You know, if it was more of a distant or sophisticated place, you would probably find a piano or no. So piano was a very expensive instrument. So mostly you will find the guitar, right, the flute and the violin.
That tango, for example, is just guitar, violin, and flute. It was all they had. And you have to understand, these musicians, most of them, they don't know how to read and write. They are very basic immigrants that came to Buenos Aires with just their luggage, and they play music by ear, and they have their own musical heritage. And in that mix, in the casitas, in the brothers, they start coming up with this popular danceable music they love. But it's mostly improvised. There's no scores for it, and it's just instrumental. There's no singer, there's no bandoneon, there's no piano, and there's no structure to it, basically. So now we are in the Buenos Aires of 1910. Buenos Aires, Argentina, is now 100 years of independence, from 1810 to 1910. And it's a big party for the country. It's the peak of our like national sentiment, and we know we're independent. There's this new identity of being Argentine, and the economic is flourishing. So people are very happy. They feel like they are making big progress. You can see this picture of Buenos Aires. It looks a little bit like Paris, like the city of lights. It looks like a real modern city. At this time, we already have our opera house. That is one of the first one and most important of the American continent, the Teatro Colón. And you can see the celebrations in Avenida de Mayo. People are cheering the Argentine flag. Everyone is in the streets feeling immigrant and Argentine at the same time. This is a typical corner of Buenos Aires. You can see words in English, in French, in English, in Spanish. Everything is mixed up and it lives together quite well. This is the opera house, majestic until today, one of the best in the world. And these are the cabarets, because now what happened in the casitas? The compadrito and the prostitutes start mixing up with something that Jorge Luis Borges calls Niño Bien, which are the young generation of the wealthiest social classes of Buenos Aires. And the Niño Bien likes to laugh and mock and copy the compadrito. They laugh at him, they admire him, but they also laugh at him and they copy him. And they admire the compadrito's way of dancing. And the Niño Bien and the upper social classes of Buenos Aires, as Argentina starts opening to the world in their 100th anniversary of its independence, Argentina starts opening, progressing, and having a better life in economic terms. And the upper classes, it's very trendy to go to France on vacations. So these young men start going to Paris. And when they go to Paris, they go to the cabarets in Paris. And whenever there's a break in the orchestras, an Argentine upper class boy goes to the piano and starts pretending he's in a casita and he starts playing a tango, and his friends start laughing and they start dancing tango with each other and inviting the French ladies, the Parisian women, asking them out to dance tango. So with these young upper class boys traveling to Paris every year in their summer vacation, tango starts being a trend in Paris, and Parisians, they love it. They cannot believe what their eyes are seeing and what their ears are listening to. They are fascinated by this music and this dance where the bodies are together and the ladies feel seduced and alive by this dance. And it becomes something very popular in Paris. So these families go back to Argentina, and everybody starts kind of like having a different mindset towards tango. Instead of thinking it's something dirty, embarrassing, indecent, and awful of the lost people of the nightlife, they start thinking, wow, maybe tango is something elegant, maybe it's something seductive, maybe it's something complex and rich and attractive.
So kind of like the Argentines, they're looking towards Europe and they're looking towards Paris, and they start appreciating their own dance through Paris. So because Paris kind of give the yes, we love this dance, you know, this is amazing. Now the people of Buenos Aires start actually appreciating tango more, and there we see that transition from the lower classes to the middle upper classes. And at the same time, now women are starting to be admitted to say to the tango scene as well.
So now Buenos Aires starts thinking, okay, tango is something good, and it's something we need to dance more and play more, and people like it, and it's trendy, and so tango starts being accepted more and more in the society of Buenos Aires, and as upper classes accepted, middle class families start accepting it, and as it was previously forbidden and banned in the conventillos, in the tenements, and in the family houses and in the social clubs, now it starts to be more accepted, and people start embracing it, and they start playing it and dancing it everywhere. So tango becomes becoming popular, right? And it starts being played in the dancings, in the social clubs, in the immigrant clubs, in the theaters, in the cafes, in the restaurants, and everywhere in Buenos Aires. Tango starts being played and it becomes the most popular music and dance of Buenos Aires. Here we can see two cabarets of Buenos Aires of the 1914, Armenonville and Pigalle. Both of them are named after Parisian cabarets. Here, Casino Pigalle, ya termina. Here you can see the upper classes of Buenos Aires traveling back and forth to Europe. This is Carlos Gardel, and this is the people. This travels on boat back and forth between Europe and Buenos Aires, where tango is carried back and forth and elaborated in that way. These are Argentine upper class families in France on vacation, showing off their tango and their Argentine spirit. So this will, now we will end. I think we're coming to time. It's 7 already. So this period ends with the tango becoming accepted. It's not forbidden anymore. Now it's played in the restaurants and in the cafes and in the clubs. And this period ends with the formation of the Orquesta Típica. That is the orchestra that has 2 bandoneons and 2 violins. And it's the archetypical formation of the tango orchestra until today. Although it's been through a lot of reformulations, of course, with the different periods. That's for other presentations. But we will listen to a tango of the 1930s to understand what did tango end up looking like at the end of this rough starting period of tango. Okay, so that is the consolidation of the style. Tango now is no longer improvised and without scores and without copyrights. There's with progress and with time and with Europe paying attention to our music, the SADAIC, that is the Association of Musicians' Rights, is formed, and tango scores start being written and registered. And there's also a growing record industry that comes along together with cinema and radio. So tango consolidates, and at the end of Guardia Vieja, consolidates as a style of its own, always a genre that is popular by definition, but it starts at the end of the 1930s. It starts becoming more and more a style of its own, consolidates, and has its own complexity and its own arrangements and its own orchestration. So that's how we arrived to the Guardia Nueva. And the Guardia Nueva is what is later called the golden age of tango, which would be, of course, a different presentation, but it's the golden age is Carlos Di Sarli and De Angelis and Troilo and all the great musicians that today we dance to. They were influenced and they were possible because of this Guardia Vieja that were the more rough and more improvised and less knowledgeable people that started tango. Okay, so we had to rush in the end because we did a little bit slow in the beginning, but we wanted to know if anyone wants to comment or has any questions. We would have liked to have more time to listen to more music, of course, but.
Go ahead, sorry, I apologize. I was just going to ask if this was going to be posted on YouTube.
We will have a video that might be available, yes.
Okay, yeah, because it was very informative, and you know, I would like the opportunity to be able to rewatch it, or you know, if I ever wanted to, just because it was a lot of information, and but it was very insightful as well.
Yes, and it was only 1/10 of what we wanted to show or talk about. There's a lot of anecdotes, the lives of these. Mostly, I am fascinated by the lives of all these musicians. When you learn about how they were born and raised, and most of them had to drop school to go work at a factory. And for example, Canaro, his first violin was at age 9. He was working at a factory and he made a violin out of an oil can because he worked in a factory of oil cans. And that's how he made his first violin, and he started playing at 9 years old with a tin can violin. And then he became he was the one who founded Sadaik. That's the musicians association that registers any music of Buenos Aires until today. So these life stories. And then we also wanted to talk with Elena about women in tango, which is another big subject because there's also very interesting life histories of these amazing, strong women that were part of the make of tango and had very, very, very hard lives. And it's just fascinating to learn about them and to understand that tango is by definition popular music that comes from the roughest and most hard situations in life. And I think that's something very interesting because in the end, it comes from there always, but with time and development, it ended up being this like very elegant, complex music that is played in opera houses around the world. And now you can find, I don't know, Berlin and Vienna and opera houses like that with over 100 musicians playing tango, and well, the work of Astor Piazzolla and everyone. More comments and questions? I don't want to talk so much.
I just have one more. I'm sorry. I was going to ask, since you said that you were only able to get to 1/10 of the material, would it be possible for you guys to pick up at a later date or to make your PowerPoint publicly available? Because it would be a shame to have all that material, like, you know, just
the video of this presentation.
Yeah, the presentation, the slideshow you guys had.
Oh yes, yes, of course. Yeah. Email me afterwards and I'll send it to you.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
The text and the slides together, it's a combination. You will find more material in it, so you will be able to further your knowledge of tango with that.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. I would love to check that out.
Glad you liked it.
I thought
Anybody?
I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting that really there wouldn't be any women dancing tango in the early days because they would be busy doing other things. So I mean that explains a lot about the machismo and the very masculine flavor of tango, that it was originated between men waiting, hanging out, having that sort of family feel as best they could as immigrants without families. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, tango has a lot of that. It's part of the history of, I think, most societies come from that place where the male was the main provider and the workforce, and he was the one who was in power, and women were private citizens, if you want, within their households and with their children.
But also like dance itself, it's kind of like, it can corrupt the soul, because as you can, there is a very close contact between the bodies, there is all this interaction that is happening, and, they're very much concerned with, the incitement of those sexual thoughts. So I would say that not only tango, but dance in general was kind of like this sphere of life that had to be really well controlled. So even in those dances that were permitted in the middle upper class, because of course they were kind of guided by different rules in the beginning, especially the female body had to be kind of controlled by, I don't know, a member of the family, usually the mother. So, women could not dance with everyone. And when they danced, they had to be very careful about how they interacted with the male. Because of course that dance could provoke this thoughts that were not...
That was indeed part of the fascination of Parisians when the Niño Bien, these upper class boys, went to Paris and sneaked into a piano and started laughing and playing tango, and the Argentine men asked women, and they were fascinated, because imagine in France they were more used to the waltz and the polka and the country dance, and to see two bodies that are so close together. And also the compadrito had a style of dancing that a compadrito was a man that had skills from the countryside and from slaughtering, and very skillful with his knife. And they danced with something that in Buenos Aires was called con corte. They danced with cut. Cut meant very tight, intense movements towards another body. And imagine in the conventillos and in the family houses, in the parties, if there were any dance allowed, it says forbidden dancing with cut, with corte, prohibido bailar con corte, because the corte was the way that the compadrito danced, and it was a very erotic sexual incitation in some ways. So it was forbidden and it was prohibited. Imagine how strong that was, that even my grandmother, who danced tango and met my grandfather dancing tango, she never went to dance tango by herself. She could only go dance tango with her mother or with her sister. Even until the generation of my grandmother, tango was not very, I mean, still until today, tango is not like, fathers don't like to see their daughters dancing tango very often. So it's always, I think there's always something subversive and rebellious about any dance, but especially about tango, because it has this element of body closeness and this corte, this cut movements that are very inciting of the imagination, I guess. And you have to understand also the compadrito it was like a whole culture of the bravery and the courage. And in fact, Jorge Luis Borges likes to talk about that time of tango, of Palermo and the orillas and the compadrito and the knives, because tango originally was a lot about that, about courage, about seduction, about duels and como desafíos. And then later on with the Guardia Nueva, and even later it became with the figure of Carlos Gardel, it became sentimental. The singers started appearing, the lyrics started appearing. Imagine the lyrics of the Guardia Vieja, the few lyrics that you can find, they are all El Choclo, and they are all sexual references, mostly to the masculine organs. Yes, El Choclo, for example,
Like a corn cob.
and El Serrucho, or phrases that talk about men and their sexual activities. And then later on with Carlos Gardel, the tango becomes something sentimental about the mother and about you who left me and didn't love me and all that stuff. But really, originally, tango was not sentimental at all. It was a rough, brave music, very raw and very, it was more about, Jorge Luis Borges says that tango reminds us that fighting can be like a dance, or that dance can be like a fight. And that was this period of tango, of the Guardia Vieja and of the Buenos Aires, of the casitas and the immigrants, and those early times of Buenos Aires becoming its own identity. But in regards to your question, Rebecca, I have to say that within the history of tango, we've always found, even in the very beginning in the casitas, those casitas were run by women, very strong women that were very highly respected. So within the history of tango, despite the machismo and the predominance of the male figure, we always can find through the history of tango very, very strong women that did amazing things and had very strong, amazing lives within the world of tango. So there's a lot to read about and to learn about from that. Okay, I think we don't have, let me see the chat. Oh, I see here. Oh, any movies? Thank you, thank you. Will there be a part 2? I would love to. If you would like to, I'd love to do it. I love to read and learn about tango, and I learn a lot in the process. And I also challenge myself with my own preconceptions. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires to a family that belongs to tango, so I have my own heritage and my own ideas, but it's nice to have a reality check with historians and learn about other versions of the history, not just mine. Oh, lots of nice comments. Gauchos are the Argentine cowboys. Great presentation. Vení, ayúdame con los comentarios, Elena. Will there be part 2? Hopefully, yes. Any movies that we can watch? Ooh, there's a lot of movies. Think that the first Argentine movie that had sound in the history of the Argentine cinematography, the first movie with sound was called Tango. So tango and the cinematography industry in Buenos Aires go along together. They grow together. Cinema grows thanks to tango, and tango grows thanks to cinema. They are very closely related. So you can start with tango, which is on YouTube, free, and it's just a black and white movie that is great. And then there's one that I watched recently of Enrique Santos Discépolo that is called Cuatro Corazones, 4 Hearts. It's on, all of these movies are on YouTube. But if you send me an email, I can send you a list where you can find lots of Argentine movies that portray tango. They are great. I love to watch old movies and I love tango, so it's one of the things I love.
Cuatro Corazones? Cuatro Corazones? What was the name of that?
Jill and I visited Buenos Aires last year and saw street tango, Brickpot. Oh, how nice is that? I love when I'm walking in the streets of Buenos Aires and you see people dancing. I just love it. Well, everywhere. In Paris, you can see that too. Because this thing, it's very important that we talked about the Niño Bien and the wealthy families going to Paris in the 1900s. And Paris has its own development. A lot of tango, Argentine tango musicians danced, of course, but died in Paris because in Argentina it was very difficult to make a living, and they just took a boat, it traveled for 3 months, and they landed in Paris and they made their careers there. So Paris has its own history, orchestras, musicians, recordings, cabarets, and even styles that were born and developed in Paris. And until today, if you go to Paris, you can dance tango every night in 5 different places and even in the street. Your email address here, I will type it in. Okay, perfect. What else? Roger says a part 2 would be cool. Yes, Guardia Nueva, because Guardia Nueva, that would be the second part, is the consolidation and the new, like it's the evolution and the reaching the golden age of tango with Troilo, with De Angelis, with Carlos Di Sarli, with Canaro, and it's the peak of the tango majesty, because with the Guardia Nueva, tango becomes very popular, and there's, imagine, tango is even played in the carousels, in the calecitas of the kids, in the social clubs, in the universities, in the dancings and everywhere. So with this massive popularization of tango, orchestras are huge and they compose and they refine themselves and they consolidate, and you have it's the richest. That presentation would be very very hard to do because there's so many orchestras and styles and things to talk about, but it you know, Pugliese is the ending part of that era, and it's the golden era of tango, the Guardia Nueva. It's what we all dance to today, mostly. The ones who love traditional tango, we like the golden era, the 1940s, which is the majestic tango era. Okay, so I think we have to, what else? A mini series, Rebecca. Yes, we have to do it. One day we will be famous on Netflix. They will try to get us, but I don't know if we will accept. Okay, it was very nice to have you all. Thank you for being here with us. We worked a lot to put this together. We debated a lot, and we worked a lot, endless nights of reading and writing and thinking and talking with Elena, but also having fun. So thank you, Elena, and thank you, Rebecca, for being there with us. Thanks, Roger, Julia, and Jan there. I see you smiling. Michael, I think, okay. Just thank you all.
Adios.
Thank you for being here, and you gave us more courage to continue researching and putting things together, so we all learn together.
That's so nice.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Bye. Take care. Good night.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye.
Bye.